It's now my pleasure to introduce Professor Sarah Chinn, who I have to tell you at every calendar meeting that she attended would look at a photo and then tell us a story that we'd never forget. I still remember the history of the photo that became the cover of the calendar, and I hope you tell that tonight. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Chinn, the chair of the English department at Hunter College, author of the prize-winning book, Spectacular Men, Race, Gender, and Nation on the Early American Stage, 1780 to 1830. Sarah Chinn.
Hi, everyone. So I have to say I was surprised and honored to get an email actually from Stephen inviting me to join this group, someone from Manhattan, although I do live in Brooklyn, so I guess I'm halfway to Queens. I've noticed people have been speaking, they've sort of been going back and forth between the past and the present, so I think I'm going to do that too. I grew up in London, I moved to New York in 1983. And the first time that I learned about really gay life in Queens was when Ed Cedarbaum came to the floor of Queer Nation, of which I was a member, and said, my best friend was just murdered, and no one is doing anything because it's Jackson Heights, and we need you. We've been working with the Anti-Violence Project, but the police are doing nothing. We need a lot of angry queers to come from Manhattan, get on the 7 train, and just come and do your thing. And we said, okay, that sounds good. And the welcome that we received, I mean, all of these people just kind of flooding off the train, many of whom had never been to Queens before. Not me, I had, but so this sense that this was a movement that was born in Queens, but was also new to reach out to whatever resources were there. And I think that takes a certain kind of strength and courage to say, there's a thing we need to do and we can't do it on our own. And the smarts to be able to identify where that is and bring it in. And I think that, to me, was one of the most incredible things that Queer Nation ever did, was partnering with Ed, with Danny, with other people, and of course with the Rivera family, to bring justice for Julia Rivera. So that was sort of my first experience of gay life in Queens. So now I'd like to fast forward, and I get this email out of the blue saying, you know, we'd love to have you come and be involved in this calendar. And I said, oh, that sounds great. So I'll just get on the train and get out at, at LaGuardia. And I was just astounded by the wealth of material that was just there on that table. It was all of us sitting around a conference table, and Richard and Stephen would just pull out these photocopies of image after image after image, most of which I'd never seen before. And to see just the array, the variety, the diversity of queer faces from the 19th century all the way till basically yesterday, and to have what felt to me a really meaningful and heavy responsibility to pick the right images to represent LGBT life in New York City, and particularly in Queens. I mean, that felt like a real responsibility, that to say no to an image was to say, this isn't representative enough. And there were maybe like 8 of us around the table, but even then, it felt like a very weighty responsibility. I think in the end, the images that we did pick were fantastic. But to see, and just picture after picture of people outside bars in Queens, and people at the beach in Queens, and people, out in Reese Park, and to see that incredible richness of LGBT life in the 5 boroughs, and particularly in Queens, was humbling, I think. So I'm gonna rewind a little bit back, because I do want to talk about the image that Richard sort of pointed towards, which is a photograph of the very first Gay Pride March, not parade, Christopher Street March of 1970. And it's this moment where I'm sure everyone knows, right, they didn't used to end up in the village, right? They didn't go from the mainstream to the ghetto. They went from the ghetto into Central Park to say, we are here, right? We are all of New York. So it's this beautiful picture of a group of people, sort of a couple of kind of clumps of people sitting in Central Park, and each of them has a sign from their organization. So there's one that says Mattachine Society, there's one that says Gay Liberation Front, and there's one that says Lesbian Power. And I looked at it and I was like, that is the story of gay activism from 1968 to 1972 in that picture, right? So the Mattachine Society, the pioneering, what were they called? Homophile civil rights group of the 60s, incredibly brave, right? Would go down to Washington, D.C. and demonstrate outside the White House in the early 60s wearing their suits. By the way, I would like to point out my shoe game is very fine, so it's not just the gay men. So there's that, right? There's this very soon-to-be outdated civil rights movement that we actually see then coming back in the 1980s, right, looking for respectability. All the women had to wear skirts, all the men had to wear ties, they were almost all white, they were almost all middle class professionals. And they embraced that identity as a way to say, we are just like, we can be just like everyone else, right? So that's sort of that movement that's starting to fall away. And then right in the middle, we have the Gay Liberation Front, right, which is the today of that photo. And a lot of men actually came from Mattachine and moved into the GLF and moved into radical gay liberation politics, which was not just about being gay, right? That, they would say things like, the gay struggle is the feminist struggle. The gay struggle is the anti-colonial struggle. The gay struggle is the anti-racist struggle. Right? And my favorite slogan of theirs, we will never go straight until you go gay. And to them, gay meant what queer meant to me coming up in the 90s, which was resisting gender norms, resisting normative sexuality, resisting being closeted, resisting being just like everyone else, right? So here is these people just sitting around this sign, right? But they are the today of that moment. And then to the far side are these lesbian activists who, in a very few short months, are going to break away from the GLF because of the sexism that was in the movement, because of the misogyny that was in the movement, right? And say, we can't deal with you guys anymore. We don't have as much money as you do, right? We have to fight for our kids because they're being taken away from us. We're aware that women still can't get legal abortions. You may not care about that, and that's fine, that's not your deal, but as women, many of whom have had sex with men, were married to men, this is our issue as well. So we need to embrace not just sexual liberation, but the liberation of all people. And when you say gay liberation is feminism, fine, but you can talk the talk, we're going to walk the walk. So in this moment are these three groups that are coming together just then, just at that second in that photograph, and within months, are going to break apart. And so that photo felt so meaningful to me because it was a moment of promise and also a moment of dissolution. And it really made me think about, this is what activist politics is all about, right? You come together, you work together, you make something happen, you do it, and then something's going to break you apart. But I think it also pointed us towards what did happen in the 80s, and I was so glad that you mentioned this, right? Which was, for the tragedy of AIDS that so many of us lived through was also a triumph of solidarity, that it brought lesbians, gay men, and trans people together out of necessity, and in fact, I think allowed us to form a community that was not simply about ignoring difference, but had to be about embracing difference and had to be about an intersectional politics, because AIDS then and even more now is an issue not only of sexuality and the criminalization of drug use and the criminalization of people of color, right? But it's all of those things. And so now I'm going to fast forward to today. To be able to see those images and to be able to see my own history and also histories of people that were nothing like me, and to feel both different from them in a good way and also to feel solidarity with them in an equally good way was really a privilege. And I really would like to thank the folks at LaGuardia for inviting me. It was a wonderful experience, and thank you all for coming.